Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and this is the Backlog. The title making me question if I even like playing video games anymore this week was Blasphemous. In it, you play as some sort of stupid cone-headed doofus as he runs around, slapping things with his dumb concrete sword and just dying a whole lot. There's a plot here, but I cannot be bothered to learn about it. It's all just so frickin' dour and gloom and doom, which fits the game, but it's frickin' 2021, which comes after 2020. Both were and are pretty horrible and depressing, so this really was one of the worst times to play through this game. Anyway, you run around, fight enemies, and die, because it's one of those games. You can parry and slide, which the game tells you can use to defend, then almost immediately throws enemies at you that these moves don't work on. I think that was about when I checked out and stopped paying attention to any text the game sent my way. The game's set up like a Metroidvania, but given that you don't really get new abilities that help with traversal, I'm not sure if it qualifies as one. This game is frustrating as hell, and I just finished playing it as I type this out, so my thoughts might be a little jumbled, so forgive me. Anyway, you run around, fight enemies, kill bosses, pick up collectibles. Some of the said collectibles, I still have no idea what they do, due to lackluster descriptions. That goes for several of the abilities you can collect as well, though I'm not sure if the game just either doesn't explain or if the text was just too dull that I could not sit through it. Near the end, I sometimes was doing things I still had no idea were functions. Anyway, when you die, you go back to a save point, which are spread pretty far apart. You do have some healing flasks with you, but using them makes you vulnerable for a significantly long time. If there is an enemy anywhere around when you use it though, you'll probably get sucker punched, so hopefully you don't take more damage than you healed. The enemies vary from inconsequential to a huge pain, and many of them are damage sponges, kinda making them more difficult than they really should be. A lot of times they're thrown together in combos that are super hard to deal with. The game does the Dark Souls thing where, as I understand it, when you die, you leave behind a specter that you can go back and recollect. However, unlike Dark Souls, where you're only losing resources and knowing when to give up is part of the learning process, here you actually get a debuff that severely hampers your special gauge and how quickly you gain the game's currency. So pretty much you need to go back, so hopefully you don't die in a bad place. If you absolutely can afford to retread an area, there are spots where you can get rid of the debuff, but these are hidden around and also scattered pretty far apart. There are bosses that you need to kill, but I'd honestly say that a lot of these are easier to deal with than just the endless hallways of enemies. Except of course for the final boss and the human-sized bosses, because video game logic. I mean, I'm sure when I get around to playing the Attack on Titan game, it'll be one of the easiest titles I've ever dealt with. Anyway, I hate this game. I really, really do. I'm probably starting to sound like a broken record, but as a challenge game, Cuphead and Celeste do it right and should be the standard. When you die in them, you can get right back into the action. It's setting you back very little time. It's also very easy to just restart a bad run in those. With Cuphead having a retry button and Celeste, I mean, you only have a one-hit KO thing in that, so you don't even really need to bother. Here though, if you die, you need to trek back to where you fell, fighting all the enemies over again. Having to stand and wait for traps and moving platforms to get into place along the way, and just going through screen after screen of stuff you just did. The game also wastes your time. A lot. While not present in this part of the game, some sections do require a good bit of load time, a few seconds, even if all it's loading in is tiny enough to fit on my super small Switch screen. Sometimes you have to wait for elevators to rise and fall, and if a boss has dialogue, you have to sit through it every time, which, even if you just slam the A button to get through it faster, can still equate to around 30 seconds. This wouldn't be too bad under normal circumstances, but given how much you'll have to do the same thing over and over again, these add up. It probably took me about a dozen hours to get to the end here, and I'm pretty sure these gripes in particular probably took up a significant chunk of that. Things really should have been streamlined. The other issue is just the controls and mechanics. Sometimes button presses just wouldn't respond, and sometimes things would just work inconsistently, which makes it really hard to get into a rhythm and construct plans of action. Overall, I just really hate this game. If I would have quit when I stopped having fun, I probably would have stopped about 1 hour in, but the game seems to have measured its difficulty that it feels just doable enough that I was able to get through with stubbornness alone. I think I'd rank this as being more unfair than a challenge, though either way it does require a good bit of skill. Of course, there were only a few times when I got a feeling of accomplishment for doing anything in Blasphemous. It was more of a relief that I wouldn't have to do a section again other than that. I'd say this game is largely for hardcore masochists. Like, literally. The game glorifies pain, violence, and blood to a weird degree, and despite playing literal hentai games, I'd say this was one of the most fetishistic by far. I'd say avoid unless you're either a huge M or hate yourself and think that life doesn't shit on you enough already. Oh, and the final boss requires some RNG for you to be able to effectively deal damage to, so wow, yeah, kind of further backs up the whole being unfair more than skill-based thing I was saying before. I'm done. I don't care that I got the bad ending or that there's a Bloodstained DLC campaign and I love Bloodstained. I will never play this again. Blasphemous can get fucked. Ramble over. Then in more pleasant news, I finished Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. Well, I say more pleasant, but anyway, the story is about Watanabe. In high school, his best friend takes his own life, and ever since then, he seems to just be stumbling through life, going through the motions and not being entirely sociable. At first glance, he would probably come across as quite boring, but since, as the main character in a book, we're able to see his inner thoughts, you can see just how much thought he puts into things and that his dull exterior is a product of not only his past trauma, but also his general disillusionment with people, many of them preaching lofty ideals but having no follow-through, and indeed, many of them just repeating what they themselves heard rather than having any ideas of their own. Where he actually does show great interest is in the few people he actually does interact with. He listens to their problems, shows support, and tries to help them as best he can, going above and beyond in many cases. Most of them are among those that society has forgotten about or looks down upon. Foremost among them Naoko, the woman who was dating his best friend at the time of his death. They meet up by chance and Watanabe becomes infatuated with her and pursues a relationship, even after she winds up in a sanatorium following a mental breakdown. He visits her when he has free time, trying to provide support so that she can get better, and he even befriends another one of the patients there. There is also Midori, a college classmate who becomes very close to him. He views her almost as a sister, but she seems to hold deeper feelings for him, though he remains unaware. That's hopefully a brief enough synopsis to not give too much away. As I said before, I really love Murakami's writing style. Again, he combines his experience with Japan with what he knows of Western media to create a nice middle ground that a large audience can relate to. Then there's also the way that this book is grounded in reality, yet there remains something almost otherworldly about some of the places and events that give things a simultaneous sense of realism and fantasy. This is the third book of his I've read, and I intend to do more, so I'd say give it a read if you're up for something that deals with mental health and is a good bit depressing. Definitely need to be in the right headspace for this one. Then I read Volume 1 of Bottom Tier Character Tomozaki by Yuki Yaku. It's about a fantasy world where their version of Smash Bros. Is the #1 PvP game and actually has decent online. Okay, I kid, it's realistic fiction. Though, it does explain why I'm using some Smash video here. Kamiya Tomozaki is the best player of the game Attack Families, but is otherwise a huge loser in high school. He sees life as a crappy game with vague rules and where the stats you're given at birth determine your life. Then one day, after beating the second best player at Attack Families, they arrange an offline meeting. When he goes, he's met by the most popular girl at school, Aoi Hinami, who's disappointed to discover the identity of her rival. After hearing Tomozaki complain about the unfairness of life, She tells him that the real world is an excellent game that can be learned and beaten, and takes it upon herself to teach Tomozaki how to win at life. I really liked the book. I enjoyed them explaining life and social tips through the lens of video game logic and metaphors. I also found myself interested in the characters. This was only volume 1, so most of them weren't super fleshed out, but I'm sure that'll come with time. Tomozaki himself was lame and weak, but passionate about the game he loved, which would sometimes cause him to break out of his shell and assert himself. I also like that he was willing to change and makes a great effort to do so, all in the advice of someone he respects. Hinami is also fun, having her public face and the one she used when it comes to gaming. She keeps the plot going and is in control of most situations, acting almost like a tutorial or game master. As for the rest of the cast, what they did show made me interested in where they go from here. Then there was the Smash Brothers angle, which caught my attention immediately. Going into it, I didn't know there'd be an aspect like that in the book, me only picking this up after digging around for some light novel recommendations. I read the name Attack Families, didn't make the connection, and then picked up on it immediately after they mentioned wave dashing a few pages in. The idea is integrated super well, those who are unfamiliar getting hit with a bunch of jargon that just serves to drive home how into the game and what a huge nerd about it Tomozaki is, whereas those who do play somewhat seriously can get a kick out of terms like short hop and forward air being used in the text, and it's serving almost as a secret Easter egg in plain sight for those in the know. And I'm also glad to report that while this is a Japanese title with lots of girls in it, it's not misogynistic. Maybe that's not too surprising. I might just be a little paranoid after that last volume of No Game, No Life. I had a great time, read through this in a few sittings, and I'll be putting at least one more volume on my next book order. If you're looking for some light reading, want something from overseas, and maybe even something to speak to your inner gamer, give it a look. This also has an anime, which I watched the first episode of. I felt it moved a little fast, and some of the ideas did sound kinda dorky out loud, so it might not be as good in moving form, but it was only the first 20 minutes, and the basics are still there, so if a book is a hard sell for you, this might work for you instead. I'll watch more myself, I'll just avoid going further than what I've read, since that strikes me as the best way for me to experience this. And that'll do it. Probably would have played more if it was anything other than Blasphemous. Next game, I gotta pick a winner. What on my list is fail-proof? I guess we'll see next week. Anyway, thanks for watching, maybe subscribe if you enjoy this sort of thing, and perhaps I'll see you in the next episode.